I'm Nat, and I am the head of communities at Exceptional Individuals. It looks to me that most of the people, if not all today, are from the UK, so welcome. And we are a London-based organisation, but we do support the whole of the country. And normally we deliver webinars every single Thursday at 12 till 1. Today we're doing Dyscalculia, but without further delay, I think we should get right into it to find out what is dyscalculia? How common is it? Are you likely to have it? Or do you just want to learn a bit more? That's what we're going to be going into. Obviously, no one's going to be walking away today with a diagnosis, just to set expectations. But you kind of knew that already. So as mentioned, we support people who are neurodivergent. That covers any different alternative way of thinking, but we specialise in dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism and ADHD. Now, dyscalculia normally gets kind of like coupled up with dysgraphia because a lot of people consider them like the add-on, the +1 to dyslexia. And though that can often be the case, they are completely different, well, maybe not completely, but definitely different conditions. So here's a bit more about what we do, support anyone who's looking for support, who's neurodivergent, who's getting in the workplace, get in contact, or if you're a company, maybe we can drop by and do some training for you. But I bang on about this every week, so I'm going to move on. And before we get in, when we talk about the overlap, I always like to mention what is neurodiversity. It's a fluctuation of ability. So it's being, maybe for dyscalculia, you might be not great at maths, but you might be exceptional at communication or decision making. It's about having that kind of like difference that is quite noticeable. If you're just like low at everything, you're probably not dyscalculic. So you can't just say everyone who's bad at maths is dyscalculic. You can't. Sarah was wondering about the link with ADHD as well. No, and that's a good question. They do all overlap, and the chances of having, I know with dyslexia, you're 50 times more likely to have dyscalculia and dyslexia than just have dyscalculia alone. ADHD, I don't have any particular stats for you, but I do know that they kind of like mash in together. So if you have ADHD, it's not completely unheard of to be dyscalculic as well. Getting a diagnosis for it, though, is not so easy because it's normally the one people pay less attention to. Fun fact, I've been learning, we did a webinar a while back on hyperlexia, which is essentially the opposite of dyslexia. It relates to autism quite heavily, and it's about being able to read at a young age. There's also hyperculia, which is the opposite of dyscalculia. And again, that can very heavily relate to autism. And again, ADHD is just a few steps away from that. I'm on the waiting list for a formal ADHD diagnosis, so I think there is a link. Thanks, Becky. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, right? We're going to go through questions. And these are questions which are normally asked when diagnosing dyscalculia, or are typically the most common characteristics or traits. And just to set expectations, I have extravagated, or I have like heightened the examples to create a sense of empathy. Because if I said, for instance, 1 + 1 = 11, you'd be like, okay, I get it, but I don't really get it. So I've done things that even if you are not dyscalculic, you would resonate with. So just because you might find some of the questions I'm going to ask today difficult does not mean you're dyscalculic, but it's more about having a better understanding of what it can be like if you are. So with that out of the way, oh, Sandra says, I've always had a higher than average reading age, so it's interesting to hear about the links. Nice. Same again with the reading and writing. Cool. So 32. I want you all to remember this number in your heads. Do not write it down. I feel like David Blaine at the moment doing a magic trick, but trust me, just remember this number. So the first question I want to ask you is what time is being shown here? TC has says, daughter has dyscalculia, dyslexia and ADHD. I was wondering if I have dyscalculia as I have always had trouble with maths. Excellent at English as my daughter is, but can't get maths. Well, it is hereditary, so the likelihood is very high. I'm dyslexic, by the way, and I'm not diagnosed dyscalculic, but I am. I understand the concept of maths, but I just can't fathom it. Now, I see all of you have put 10-10, and that's great. But if you are dyscalculic, you may struggle with reading analog clocks. It's just it just throws you off. And for instance, if I see it took me so long to learn to tell the time, like a ridiculous amount of time. I was in like mid-secondary school by the time I learned to tell the time, which was embarrassing for me, and I just didn't tell anyone. So I always had to have a digital clock that was just really simple. And eventually, I can now tell the time with an analog clock, but I can only tell it when it has the numbers. You know, when you have the analog clocks that only have the lines? Yeah, my brain, like, I can work it out, but it's not something instantaneously. So if someone, if every time I had a watch, would say, "Oh, mate, what's the time?" I'd panic. I was like, "Oh dear God," and I'd just quickly show them my arm and make them read it. But then you'd get someone say, "Oh, I can't quite see it. Can you tell me what it is?" And I'd panic. So very, very common that you can tell the time, but you might struggle to tell it in certain mediums or different ones. Tiffany says, I struggle to tell time on an analog clock. I had to count the numbers in order to know the time. I just can't read it and know what the time is. Also, I really struggle with 24-hour, so I need to have digital and 12-hour. Otherwise, it ain't happening. The next one, what number is higher? -5 or -6? Which is the higher number? And I am going to be asking a lot of questions today around maths. And do not worry, some of them are purposely done to trip you up. So try not to feel bad if you do not get them correct. It's to give you an idea of the type of mathematical problems that can affect dyscalculia. Because if there's one thing I want you to realise is that it doesn't mean you're bad at maths. You can be bad at maths and be dyscalculic. You can be great at maths and dyscalculic. But people get them confused quite a lot. It's more about the way your brain processes number and how it like remembers and retains. So similar to dyslexia with reading, but not dyslexia. April says, even though I don't have dyscalculia, I prefer to have the time shown in a digital format rather than analog format on the Apple Watch. The time looks more precise this way. I agree. You know, there's no kind of like, oh, is that like 15 or not? You just know. I had to guess that one. Brilliant. So on this answer, a bit of a trick question because you look at the numbers here. Okay, 5's low, 6 is high, so 6 is a higher number. Oh, but you've got the minus symbols. Actually, on the number line, -5 is higher. But if we're talking about negative numbers, -6 is higher, depending on your understanding of the question. So actually, my question here was a little bit ambiguous. So yeah, -5's the answer. But the point I want to take away from this is that a lot of the time with dyscalculics, the logic in your head is correct, but the answer you give isn't correct to the situation that is in front of you. So if you put -6, you're not necessarily wrong. It's just the question you answered in your head is different to the one that was actually intended. Rana says, they didn't do dyscalculia assessments when I went for my dyslexia assessment. Why? Well, that normally goes down to the fact that people just aren't qualified. You know, to get diagnosed, if you become a dyslexia assessor, it's just not, you don't automatically learn to do dyscalculia because they are different conditions, despite how similarly they overlap. Oh, TC, don't worry. Now, this one is a tricky one. How much would this basket of food costs? So have a look at the basket. You can see what we got. We've got some cheese in there. We've got a banana, pineapple, a bottle of wine, some milk, some eggs, some carrots. You know, give me a ballpark figure. How much would you think you'd spend? Let's say it's at like, I don't know, Tesco's or Sainsbury's. So we're not talking M&S here. We're not talking Lidl, you know, middle of the range. It was a proper dyslexia centre in London. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just because it would be a different assessment and you'd probably pay more, to be honest with you. Okay, we've got 20. We're going to go with pounds here. So if you aren't in the UK, do dollars or whatever works for you. So we've got 50, 25, 20, 20. Okay, we've got 30. Now, I don't actually have a correct answer for this. But if you've ever been one of those people that go to your little county fair and they see a bottle of jar with sweets in and they say, oh, guess the number, that would be a very difficult question for someone with dyscalculia to answer. And also the idea of looking at this basket and breaking it down. Okay, so how much do eggs cost? How much does a banana cost? Are you adding them up in your head individually? Or are you just looking at it and just remember from like memory that every time you go shopping, about a basket of food is going to cost about £20? I think, you know, those of you who put 20, 25, probably quite accurate. But if you are like way off, for example, maybe you said you're one of those people that says, oh, well, maybe £12 or maybe 70. If you're someone who always gets it completely off when someone says, oh yeah, so how much is that? And the estimate you give is just a mile off. That's another common characteristic of dyscalculia. Put these Roman numeral symbols in order of, you know, a sentence like 1, 2, 3, 4. Tiffany has no clue. Do not worry. I mean, I'm a big fan of Grand Theft Auto, the video game, and I tell you, the numbers confuse me so much. I'm like, am I playing 4 or 6? I don't know, or 5. Like, and again, in theory, it's not that difficult to understand Roman numerals. It's just an equivalent system, but it's enough to throw us off. And again, this is going to be the thing that I mentioned time and time again. Dyscalculia isn't about not understanding something. It's about not being able to kind of connect the dots, or being able to like attach one bit of knowledge to another bit of knowledge. Okay, so we got 1, 4, 5, 6, 10. Nice. Now, I don't know about you, but I always get confused between 4 and 6. No matter how much I try to remember, my brain just really, really struggles to remember which one is which. I have a written blog for EI about dyscalculia. I'll put the link in the description box when I upload the webinar. Thanks, April. That would be very useful. The Y's don't join up in my brain. That's what it feels like. Thanks, Becky. I know that feeling. Okay, so what is 126 times 344? Okay, brilliant. So Sarah says, I wouldn't be able to do this without writing it down for some reason. And that's exactly it. OMG. A lot of people are able to do these complicated sums if they're able to write it down. Or even if you're like me and you're like, I wouldn't be able to ever work that out. Given enough time, if you gave me a bit of paper and pen and you gave me like as much time I possibly could need, I could probably work it out, because I know how to, you know, maybe I'll do 100 times 300 and then 226, and I could work it out. But I couldn't do it quickly because my brain would struggle to split it apart in very manageable chunks, and it just looks at it in one number. So again, another example where in theory you know how to sort it out, but in order to do it fast, the brain kind of short wires. It's like, yeah, I can't do this, even though you can. Now, obviously, some of you may just not have learnt the way of solving these problems, so wouldn't know even if you had all day long. But you do not lack the capacity to learn it. Even writing it down would take me a while. Yeah. Wouldn't be able to work it down if I've written it down. Yeah, so a lot of you get confused. Yeah, forever. I mean, for me, that number is just so gigantically large that even if you could work it out, you would probably just abandon ship before you kind of got there. And with dyscalculia, the idea goes is that you could do this question several times. Like if I asked you this question multiple times throughout today, you might get a different answer every single time. So it's just there isn't much consistency. Some days you might score really high on a maths test. Another day you might completely flunk it. The consistency is not there. Okay, this number. Imagine there's a dot next to the 3. I want to know, does anyone have a guess what this number is? I'll give you a clue. It's tasty. It's pi. Yes, everyone's favourite mathematical number. April definitely knew that. So look at this number here. And, okay, everyone had a good look at it? I never understood pi, don't worry. It's something about a circle. So, next one is... I'm going to ask you to write down as much as you've remembered. I know, do not worry. Pi's a long number, and it's kind of like never ending. but we'll give it a good go. So to the best of your memory, type the number you just saw. I know, stress. If any of you are actually dyscalculic, this might be actually quite a stressful exercise. Wow, we've got a lot of numbers. Can't remember the rest. Most of us seem to be able to remember at least three numbers. So 3.145 recurring. Oh, I see you rounded that up there. And that's the thing, you know, even though it's a long number and it's a number that most people would have heard of, the ability to remember in short term can be a real difficulty. I'm sure you've played those games where you have to see a number and then remember it a few seconds later. Or maybe someone has said their phone number. Does anyone here really struggle with taking phone numbers down? I hate it. So I'm on the phone and someone say, yeah. They're like, do you mind if, okay, I'm going to give you the number. I'm like, yeah. So that's 129. No. Okay, 12. No. I had a taxi driver go completely fuming at me recently because he thought I was taking the mickey. Because every time he was giving me a different number, I just kept repeating it completely wrong. And I honestly wasn't taking the, you know, my brain just wasn't recalling it correctly. Yeah, you have to ask them to repeat. It's the way people break it down as well. Yeah, and if you notice, there is a reason why telephone numbers are broken down in sections. One is because of area code, but also it just makes it easier to remember if you're able to group it. Most people remember in groups of three because three is a magic number, but, you know, it's different for everyone. I've called so many wrong numbers in my life. You and me both, Becky. There's some of the people I get through to. My kids remember Pie from a song. I only remember... No, I don't remember ever, actually. So this comes back to short-term memory. There is a link between short-term memory and dyscalculia, as well as dyslexia, autism, dyspraxia. You know, you notice with dyslexia is kind of higher and dyspraxia, but memory issue is a trouble. So we've done short term and we might even do long term later. Yeah, repetition is the only way it works for me. Yeah, repetition, it can definitely work for some. I have had the same telephone number for 10 years and I honestly can't remember it beyond 07. I honestly can't. And I don't know, I think my brain's like, not important. Even if I know a number, I transpose the digits and type it in the wrong way without realizing. Yeah, even if I knew my telephone number, I know for a fact I wouldn't be able to re-say it out loud without getting it confused. I'd have to write it down multiple times. When we used to have the old, you know, landlines, I was able to remember telephone numbers, but that's only because I was able to remember the pattern on the keyboard. So, you know, with the, like, but translating that to like a number line in my head, not possible. So we're starting to understand now what dyscalculia is. That you're not dumb, you're not stupid, it's just the way that the brain is able to order numbers and symbols and formulas can just overwhelm the brain or just doesn't play to its strengths. So does this equation make sense? And I know equations sound scary, but we'll break it down. An equation says that there are two things are equal. It will have an equal sign, so we both know like that sign there means equal. So x minus 2 equals 4. So whatever x is must be the missing number that equals 4. Does anyone know the answer to this, by the way? 6. So the equation, 6. The equation says what is on the left, x minus 2, is equal to what is on the right, 4. So, makes sense. The equals on the side is both numbers are the exact same. So 4 is equal to x minus 2. I could never get my head around equations. They never made sense. Yeah, it really struggles to me. But, I mean, in theory, like, or in the practice of it, does it at least make sense that what's on one side has to equal what's on the other side? I'm not asking you to learn today in terms of maths, but just learning that the idea is there. So we understand that what's on the left has to equal what's on the right. Can you calculate the value of x in the following equation? 5x plus 10 equals 50. So what is x? And this one is to represent that even though most of us will understand the idea of algebra or will understand the concept, when we're able to put it in practice, that's when the brain might just jump ship. So if I remember rightly, didn't we have like 11 people who said that they understood it with their little thumbs up? And 2 people said they didn't. But yet on here, 8 is the correct answer, by the way. Less people were able to answer that. So it's another perfect example of being dyscalculic doesn't mean you're bad at maths, because you understand the maths. It's just being able to put that understanding into practice is where the difficulty arises. Yeah, so Sandra, I totally agree with you. So what is it, like 5? Was it 5 times 8 or 5 divided by 8? I mean, I'm not here to explain the actual maths. So how was 8 the correct number? Isn't it something like 5 times 8? No. It's about working backwards. Thanks, Sanjan. Yeah, I'm not even going to attempt this. It's more about the reason why we find it difficult. You need a different webinar if you want someone to actually explain why it is what it is. Now we're moving on to a little bit different. This is when it crosses over a little bit into dyslexia. Write a billion in numbers. Oh, nice. TC did a process of elimination. A lot of us do that as well. It's a lucky guess sometimes. All right, so we've got 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Okay, we've got quite a few different answers here. We've got maybe 100,000, a million. Maybe we've got a Googleplex. Yeah, a lot of you are guessing. And that is what a lot of people with dyscalculia do. They just take a good guess. And this comes back to the Roman numerals, because it's very, very similar idea that there's more than one way of showing something, but your brain has kind of wired itself to only really understand one. Billion, a lot of us know a billion. We might not be able to visualize it, but we know of a billion. Or a lot of us know what the number 4 looks like, but might not know what number 4 looks like in Roman. Or on the clock, if the clock is like big hands there, little hands there, we may really struggle with knowing what that's meant to represent. But if it was in digital form, we'd get it. So a lot of the time, it's about how the information is displayed. And if it isn't displayed in the way which we are familiar with, or the way that our brain has been able to create neural pathways, it's going to have a really difficult time. 1 and 0, 9 is simple. Okay, to simplify it, yeah. If the answer was quite, I think it was that one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, 9. I can't remember that, to be honest. It's a very difficult thing for me to remember. I always have to Google it. Now, more on to things that are symbols, so aren't necessarily numbers. So, greater than. Have you ever been able to remember which symbol is greater than? Okay, I have a trick of remembering more than less. Left hand is less than otherwise. Would never remember. Oh man, I need to try that. I counted 1, 2, 3 out loud 3 times. The 0 for 1,000, million, billion, if that helps anyone. That's a good one. It's eating the number one, isn't it? Yeah, Sarah. So 1 is always eating the bigger number. I get that. But when you see the numbers like that, you know, there's no number each side. I'm like, I don't know which ones it's eating. So that's a really good point, Sarah, that if you have more information, for instance, numbers either side, you're able to remember it because you're able to visualize an image of maybe a crocodile eating the bigger number. But when it is just down here with no kind of context, very, very difficult. Oh yeah, means nothing in this context. The open side would show the bigger number, I think. Yeah, but is it left or right? So a lot of us, and it's, you know, you can see how it overlaps with dyslexia, are very visual thinkers. But the visual way we learn is individual for you. And I think it depends on what your brain was able to engage with. So when I do pi, I think of a pie. When I'm doing greater than or equal to, I think of a crocodile eating things. But when you take away part of that information and there isn't enough information to draw that visual imagery, it falls apart in my brain. And also stress can relate to it as well. So the more stressed you are, the less likely you are to be able to join the dots. Now this one goes to real world. So we're leaving the math world behind now for a moment. Left and right. We often talk about this for dysgraphia, as well as dyslexia and dyspraxia, all the dysses, but it also affects dyscalculia. So on this person, which is the left hand? Now this is interesting, isn't it? Such a simple question, you'd think. Left and right. Everyone knows that, right? But look at this image. It's not one or two people, quite a few people. Someone got the hand as the elbow. Can't help that. But we've also got this hand. Okay, Joy had to swivel on my chair to figure it out. Brilliant. Had to think about it twice. Yeah, it's not as simple as you would think. Because in your brain, you're thinking left. Okay, lefty loosey. That's how I remember it. But then you go to the left hand. But then you're thinking, oh no, I have to think around. So you have to turn around and look from that person's perspective. So where someone who isn't dyscalculic might just be able to look at it and realise, oh, I've got to see it from that person's point of view. I, for example, have to literally turn around and put myself in the position that that person is facing. Okay, we got, I'm right-handed, so I do holding a pen mine, right, with my hand and work it out. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely work out left and right for myself. But if you know someone's facing you and you say, okay, go left, go right, I send them in the wrong direction. So I really struggle to be able to put myself in someone else's point of view. So the correct answer is this side. Because remember, this person is facing us. In fairness, I will say they are transparent and there's no eyeballs, which makes it a little bit more difficult. So no hard feelings if you got it wrong. But remember, wrong is individual. Depending on how you look at this picture, your answer isn't necessarily wrong. It's the way that the answer that is right isn't the answer that you thought of. Sorry, I know that sounds confusing, and I'm not saying there's a right answer to everything, but a lot of the time, it wasn't wrong. It's just we understood it in a different way. All right, next one. How long is a piece of string? I'm sure you've been told this before, but look at this piece of string here. How long is it? Is it 30 centimeters, 600 millimeters, or 2 feet? So I mix the measurements around because, going from imperial to metric to, Fahrenheit to Celsius, like, boggles the mind. Now, I'm going to guess a lot of you have picked answers. And I'll be honest with you, they're all wrong so far. None of them are correct. Because what you've done is you've looked at it and you took a good guess. Because you didn't have all the information you needed. The expression, how long is a piece of a string, is normally used when someone says, oh yeah, just, when they don't have the information. We have no idea how long this piece of string is because you're looking at it on a computer screen and it's different for everyone. You do not have a ruler. You just can't work it out without all the information. There is no way to know. But a lot of the time, we feel like we still have to answer that. We'll just give an answer anyway. So that, unfortunately, is a very common thing. Dyscalculics can have a warped sense of spatial awareness or an understanding of shapes, distances, or volumes that seem more like guesswork than actual comprehension. So in this sense, rather than having the confidence to say, I don't know, a lot of you picked an answer anyway. And has anyone ever said to you, oh, cool, how far is it to the shops? And you're like, I don't know. You walk that distance every day. You know it takes about 5 minutes to get to the shops, but you wouldn't be able to give a distance. Or if someone says, okay, how long is your arm? I don't know. And it's that kind of being able to say, of course you know how long it is to get to the shops, you go there every day, but you aren't able to put a number to it because it's just two separate foreign concepts that just do not link up together very well. Becky says, I was very confident about my answer with this one. No, and I think that's just because the brain works in a different way. Let's take dyslexia, for example. We often think when you read and you miss out a word, that is your brain doing something wrong. But what it is, it's being smart. It's thinking, okay, skip that and let's just keep going. Let's keep this train rolling. It doesn't want to stop the motion. And before reading was a mainstream thing, that was actually a massive benefit. It was able to like stop you hitting those bumps in the road and just keep on trucking. But now that reading is such a mainstream thing in the last 100 years, it's starting to be a bit of a problem for those who think alternatively. And the same thing can be applied to maths. It wasn't always an issue, but now it's something that we require a definitive answer, which creative brains do not really like solid answers. And that's when we're running into stumbling blocks. We've got, I have no idea how to pronounce your name, but I usually just say how much time it takes me to get somewhere instead of telling the distance. Same here. When I see road signs that say, it's about a quarter mile, I have no idea how long that's going to take me. I'd much rather if it said 5 minutes. But obviously the issue with that is it depends how fast you walk. So again, you're missing information. Okay, we're almost getting there. And by the end of the day, you'll be sick to death of maths, but you'll have a good foundation of what people look for when they say, you have dyscalculia. What was the number at the start that you were asked to remember? So think back to the very beginning. What was the first number? And this is to demonstrate long-term memory, which is also a challenge. Okay, we've got, the correct answer is 32. A lot of you got that correct. Well done. I would have been with the person who said no idea. But dyscalculia we mentioned how it affects short-term memory. So when we did pi, struggling to remember something you've just seen, but it can also relate to long-term memory. Now, one person with dyscalculia and another person with dyscalculia might be very different. It's not the same for everyone. Like, you might have a great long-term memory and someone might have a short-term memory. It's not like one is directly related to one. It's the luck of the draw almost. Sarah says, my long-term memory is pretty good, but my short-term memory sucks. Yeah, I would say the same with me. But I don't even know if you'd call this long-term memory because it was like, it wasn't direct, but it wasn't long either. So these are the last few questions, and I couldn't miss out these ones. How easy or difficult do you find the following? So we've got time, directions, recalling, scheduling, sequences, or event keeping track of time. So are you good at remembering time, basically? If you find it not a trouble, keep it to the left. Difficult to the right. Reading maps. Can you read a map without getting completely flabbergasted and explode? Working backwards. What time do you have to leave if you need to be something at? So when you're booking a train, are you able to do that easily? Reading musical notations. Again, interesting one because music isn't numbers, right? But it's the same concept. It's an image that represents something else. We always think maths or dyscalculia is to do with numbers, but it's also to do with symbols and images that are there to represent something else. Not so dissimilar from language, really, is it? Ch, ch, it's letters that represent a sound. It's very, very similar, but the challenges come from a different part of the brain. So yes, they're similar, but to say dyscalculia is just math dyslexia, I would say isn't really giving it the credit it deserves. And with choreographed dance steps, a great example is those dance mats that you used to step on at arcades. Cannot work those out because the images I see on the screen to the images my feet are able to do. And this really heavily overlinks with dyspraxia. Okay, so a lot of you find it quite difficult. So if you find these very difficult, these are typical characteristics which people with dyspraxia would struggle with. It's good if I know I have to remember something, otherwise it's straight out of my head. And I think the brain's quite smart at that. We look at that as a disadvantage, but, it chooses not to remember things which it deems irrelevant. I do wonder, though, with technology now where everything can be searched and Googled for within a matter of seconds, is that making our memory worse, or is it just freeing up more space for things that we actually want to remember? Joy says, we were forced to do dance at school and it was hell for me. I couldn't remember any sequences. Yeah, Joy, do you want to know a secret? I did tap dancing for 7 years. I hated it. They thought, we'll make him good at coordination and steps and stuff. Nope, didn't work. Did not work. And that's how I knew I was probably dyscalculic and dyspraxic, because it wasn't a matter of practice makes perfect. Of course, practice made it a bit easier. I got a bit better, but definitely not to the level that you would like to think after 7 years. And a few other honourable mentions, which I didn't have time to do fun games for, but I couldn't leave out. People may have difficulties with mentally estimating the measurements of an object. So we briefly mentioned this, like how far away something is. Remembering mathematical concepts, so rules, formula, sequences. Like you might see some algebra, it's algebra, but the formulas or the science behind it, you might just not be able to recall. So you're like, I recognise this, can't do much with it. Concentrating on mentally intensive tasks. So if you are stressed, concerned, anxious, that can also make the symptoms and trait of dyscalculia heightened. So having it as a child and having it as an adult do look very different because you've come up with coping mechanisms, you've learned to mask it, and some days it might be worse than others. It doesn't always come down to just poor memory. Some days it is the dyscalculia. Again, it's blurry, they all go one in hand. But it's why that some days you can do things and other days you can't. And recollection of names. Poor names / facial retrieval may substitute names beginning with the same letters. This overlaps with dyslexia and dyspraxia quite a lot. And this is not being able to remember names, people, things, objects. Why? Well, think about it. Again, it's not different. Someone's face and their name is the exact same thing in a way. It's just a different way of symbolizing it or remembering it. I'm famously bad at remembering people's names and faces. Yeah, always great. I mean, I work a lot with kids, and when I'm doing like groups, I just like really struggle. Or when I work with a group who have a lot of unusual names that are maybe not Latin or biblical, I can't remember them. True about names, especially celebrities. Yep, I'm always like, who that guy? He was on Mission Impossible, bit short, and I can't figure it out. So that is kind of. Oh, Becky says, I greeted a stranger at the airport once, thinking it was my dad. That was triggered me into look into him more and found out about dyscalculia. Oh, Anna, it wasn't your dad. I do that all the time. I run up to someone and I'm like, hey, and I'm like, I don't know you. It is embarrassing. But if any of that was the main questions for the day, but if any of you feel that you may be dyscalculic and in the workplace and you think, you know what, it's something that has always been there, I've always struggled with it, but I just didn't think it was anything else I could do. Well, you are entitled, if you're in the UK, to get a workplace needs assessment. I say it every webinar, but it's just because it really is such a great resource. If you have a job, you are completely eligible, and you can normally get special support, coaching to help with techniques, processes. Again, this training that you get from this grant isn't about making you good at maths. It's about helping you overcome when those challenges arises. So maybe you get to a point where you're like, I'm not able to work this out. Well, can we find a way that you are able to work it out? Even if it means like using a calculator or being able to know certain websites or certain tips and tricks. I, for instance, used to like dread my 9 times table, but when you realise that, okay, you just put a finger down and then it's like really easy, like that top tip has really saved me so much stress and anxiety. So now for any questions, we've got a few minutes left, any questions on dyscalculia or any statements or things that you would like to share. So Tiffany says, Nat, do you have any courses you would recommend for maths for people with dyscalculia? I'd love to be able to pass my maths one day, but I can't do basic maths like adding and subtracting. I don't know any courses, but one thing I would recommend is try to make it relate to real life. Because again, with people like dyslexia and dyspraxia and etc., unless our brains are able to anchor it to something which we deem important, the brain just isn't interested. So, for instance, algebra makes no sense to me, but when you apply it to a real life concept, it makes sense. Or adding and subtraction doesn't really do it for me. But when I apply it to money, I'm like, well, maybe I actually care now. So that would be my best tip, is if you're struggling with something, try and kind of anchor it to a real life scenario where you fully believe that it's going to be useful in your daily life. That, unfortunately, is an element that schools normally leave out. TC says, definitely, I always wondered why I was good set for English and bottom set for maths. Poor maths really affected my education. And yeah, TC, you're completely right. You can be great at one and not so great at the other one. Unfortunately, in a lot of schools, what they do is the sets are kind of like anchored together. So if you're bad in one, they have to automatically put you in a low set for the other one because their timetables wouldn't work out. That is what happened to me, sadly. Joy says, is it possible to get a diagnosis through your GP for dyslexia or dyscalculia? Do you need a diagnosis to get a needs assessment? Really, really good questions. So first of all, getting a diagnosis for dyslexia or dyscalculia at the GP probably isn't going to happen. I'm not saying it's impossible. They just do not like doing it. Getting one for autism or ADHD from your GP is possible, but again, they don't really like doing it because the waiting list is huge, it's expensive, blah de blah. Your best bet as an adult is to go private. I know that's not what you want to hear, but unfortunately that's true. As a child, it's a lot easier. So I would ask yourself, do you really need it? But the good thing is, to your second question, do you need it to have a workplace needs assessment? No, you do not need to have an official diagnosis. You just have to strongly resonate with the challenges. So today, if you looked at this and think, you know what, I resonate with what you said, Nat, and it actually does affect me in the workplace, then let's have a chat. Maybe we're able to help you. Fiona, where would you go to get diagnosed for a child? You know, that is a question, and I think a lot of people who are qualified to diagnose people are freelancers. At Exceptional Individuals, we've got partnerships that can help diagnose the main four: dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD. But for dyscalculia, it's not something which we're able to offer yet, and that's just because there isn't a lot of people that are able to do it. But I would say maybe get in contact and we can point you in the right direction, but that's not something that we're able to offer at this moment. Sandra said, very interesting in how to get a diagnosis, especially as I'm 50, so it's quite late in life. You're young at heart. I always ask yourself, what will you gain? Like, if you want the diagnosis to better understand yourself and to give your life a bit more context for the ups and the downs, definitely do it. But if it's just something which you think, if I have it, it's not going to make much difference, in yourself, maybe not. It's a very personal decision. Would you say it's a spectrum? Sarah, absolutely. All of neurodivergence is a spectrum. There's not like an off and on switch, you are, you aren't. It's that the brain processes in different ways, and if you have so many characteristics that affect you over a long period of time, then that's how they look at it. So maybe today, every single question you struggled on, that doesn't mean you're dyscalculic. Or if you've only had like one answer and the rest you're completely fine with, again, that doesn't rule it out, because it's more about, does something affect you long term, and does it affect you in a substantial way that hinders you from day-to-day activities? That's normally what people are looking for. If it's just something which is a minor annoyance that doesn't really get in the way, then maybe not. Because obviously, from time to time, we all struggle with these things, and not everything needs a label. Fiona says, is it similar to auditory processing disorder? Absolutely, they all overlap, and they're different things, but very much on the same wavelength. TC says, I took maths 3 times to get it and into the teacher training, and then failed a teacher's practice on teaching maths because aware I have huge problems with maths. I did retake the teaching practice and passed, but then always felt extremely anxious teaching maths, and it was only primary school maths. I say I failed maths and I had to retake it in college, otherwise I wasn't allowed to go to university. Yeah, it does struggle, and that's maybe, your brain just isn't into it. We do record all our webinars and we upload them to our YouTube channel, which April kindly edits. So you can go click on the link again or just search our YouTube and you can see all our previous webinars. But if you would like to find more about a workplace needs assessment, or you just have other questions that you just didn't feel was the right time to answer today, just go and contact us. We're at exceptionalindividuals.com, or you can drop us an email at admin@accept.uk. I'm Nat, so you can always email me at nat@accept.co.uk, or Facebook us, Twitter us, whatever works for you. And yeah, that's it. So I'm going to answer a few more questions while we've got a few more minutes, and then I'll let you go enjoy the rest of your day. So Sarah says, also, do you know what causes it? I guess genetics, but wondering about it since no one in my immediate family struggles in the same way I do. Well, like I said, it is hereditary, but it doesn't have to be hereditary. So typically, it's about the neurons in your brains that when you are born, they go on a little pathway, and if they get lost, different areas develop slower or not quite the same way. So you have like an abundance of grey matter or white matter. It's a bit complicated, but yes, it's genetic. What I would recommend is go onto our YouTube channel and check out a webinar I did on the science of dyslexia. It's a little bit different, but the same concept of how it happens and why it's a thing will hopefully make a lot more sense and make you realise that there isn't actually anything wrong with it, and it's actually been all through history. It's only now that our jobs require a certain way of processing that challenges have arisen. Becky says, are there any allowances made in the workplace or getting a job like there is with dyslexia? I have failed with so many job applications if they do psychometric testing. However hard I try, I fail so badly. So I am excluded, I feel, from lots of public sector jobs. Yes, Becky, is absolutely covered under the Equality Act 2010. Dyscalculia may be less known than dyslexia. Less people may have heard of it, but it still counts as a disability legally. So any support you are entitled to, such as reasonable adjustments, asking for alternative ways of filling out applications, you are eligible for. Sunjan, my diagnosis with consultant clearly stated dyslexia and a little dyspraxia, but not dyscalculia. Again, a lot of these overlap, so they may have felt that yes, you had characteristics of dyscalculia, but it wasn't the primary thing that is holding you back in some shape or form. But it's always useful to know, because again, I'm not saying you need to be diagnosed, but just understanding that it is a thing, you can Google for support strategies and find ways that might help. Like, I'm not officially diagnosed with it, but I still look at things that can help me with my maths, because I know, regardless of whether I've got a bit of paper, it's still something I find difficult. Useful session, very welcome. Always had a problem with maths at school. You and me both. Do not worry for typos. We're creative spelling friendly here. How do I arrange for a workplace assessment, Becky? Easy stuff. You can just give us a call or go on our website and go looking for support, workplace assessment, and it literally takes like an hour. We can do it over Skype or over the phone, nice and simple, and we give you a report about what your strengths are, what you challenge with, what we recommend, and if you want to go ahead with it, we do all the paperwork. I would say give us a call. It's probably your easiest way to find out more. Alright guys, that's a lot of questions. Let's leave it for there today before our minds completely explode and we can't take any more information in. But thank you so much for attending as always, and I can't wait to see you all again. Cool. Thanks all for the lovely comments, and I'll see you all real soon. Bye.